In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to achieve true self-mastery as an executive or CEO. This is a full-length executive transformation course for free. And this is the exact process that we've used to help countless senior leaders and C-suite executives move from chronic stress and hollow success to inner peace, authentic power, and liberated fulfillment. This isn't going to be your basic 10 productivity hacks or leadership tips video. I'm going to be showing you exactly how to achieve self-mastery so you can finally lead from a place of groundedness, clarity, and authentic power instead of fear, stress, and constant reactivity. This video will show you the exact step-by-step process you need to follow so that you never have to watch another video on executive transformation again. Let's get into it. Some prerequisites. Before we dive into the transformation process itself, we need to establish the foundations that make genuine transformation possible. First, your readiness for depth work. Most executives come to this work after a trigger, burnout, divorce, a major leadership crisis, or that realization that creeps in that despite all your success, something fundamental is missing. You can't do this work effectively if you're still in denial about the emptiness. If you're still telling yourself that one more promotion, one more exit, one more achievement will finally fill that void, you're not ready yet. You need to be ready to look beneath the surface, beyond the strategies and the tactics, into the psychological and spiritual dimensions of your being. This isn't about adding more tools to your leadership toolkit. This is about fundamentally decluttering and reorganizing your inner world so that everything you do flows from a different source. The readiness I'm talking about is the willingness to acknowledge the persona you've built. The identity you've cultivated might actually be part of what's keeping you trapped. That's a difficult truth to face, but it's the doorway to real transformation. Second, understanding three major outcomes. The entire transformation process is oriented around three measurable outcomes. These aren't abstract concepts. They're tangible states that change how you experience leadership and life. Number one, inner peace. This is freedom from the chronically anxious, hypervigilant, and reactivity that keeps you up at 3 a.m. at night, despite your success. It's the ability to remain grounded, even when the business is on fire. It's the freedom from racing thoughts, from the racing mind that never stops analyzing, strategizing, worrying. Most executives live in a chronically activated nervous system. Your body is in fight or flight. Even during routine meetings, you've normalized hypervigilance to the point where you don't recognize it anymore. Inner peace means your nervous system can finally relax. It means you can be present with your family without your mind constantly drifting back to work problems. It means you sit in silence without reaching for your phone to fill the void. Number two is authentic power. This is indestructible confidence, a clarity under pressure. But it's not the ego-driven power of domination. It's not the need to prove yourself to control outcomes. It's the centered presence that naturally commands respect and inspires others. It's the kind of leadership that doesn't need to perform or posture. Authentic power means you can walk into any room and know exactly who you are, regardless of external circumstances. It means you can make difficult decisions without second-guessing yourself into paralysis. It means you can hold boundaries without guilt and navigate conflict without losing your center. This is the power that comes from integration, from having done the shadow work, from no longer being at war with yourself. Number three, liberated fulfillment. This is deep alignment with purpose, freedom from self-sabotage, and the experience of meaning that transcends external validation or achievements. It's the sense that what you're doing actually matters beyond the bottom line. It's the feeling that your life has significance that goes deeper than your title or your net worth. Most executives reach a point where they realize that achievement and fulfillment are not the same thing. You've climbed the ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. Liberated fulfillment means your actions flow from your essence, not from unconscious wounds or unexamined beliefs. It means you're creating from contribution rather than compensation. It means your work is an expression of who you are, not a defense against who you fear you're not. Third, recognizing the success-emptiness disconnect. You need to acknowledge the paradox you're living in. Externally, You've achieved what most people dream of: the title, the income, the influence, the recognition. You've won the game by every conventional measure. Your LinkedIn profile is impressive, your parents are proud, strangers assume you have it all figured out. But internally, there's restlessness, stress, self-doubt, an annoying sense that this can't be all there is. You feel like you're performing a role rather than living authentically. You're exhausted from maintaining the image. You wonder if anyone would respect you if they saw what you're actually feeling inside. This disconnect isn't fixed by achieving more. Another funding round, another acquisition, another award won't fill the void. In fact, each new achievement often makes the emptiness more apparent because it proves that external success doesn't deliver the inner peace you were actually seeking. The disconnect is fixed by addressing the unconscious patterns and the unexamined beliefs that created it in the first place. It's fixed by doing the inner work that most executives avoid because they're too busy chasing the next milestone. This is where the real transformation begins, not in your strategy, but in your psyche. Part 1. Nervous system regulation and inner peace. This is where we start because without nervous system regulation, nothing else works. Your racing mind, your inability to sleep, your constant state of hypervigilance, these aren't personality traits. They're dysregulation patterns. The problem is that most executives are running chronically activated nervous systems. You're in fight or flight, even during routine meetings. Your sympathetic nervous system is stuck in the on position. Your body doesn't know the difference between a quarterly review and being chased by a predator. The same stress hormones flood your system. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, they're all firing as if your life is literally in danger, even though you're just sitting in a conference room looking at a PowerPoint. This creates decision fatigue because your executive functions are compromised when your nervous system is activated. It creates emotional volatility because your amygdala is hijacking your prefrontal cortex. It creates that feeling of being constantly on, even when you're technically off, because your system never fully discharges the activation. You can't think clearly when you're dysregulated. You can't access your creativity. You can't be present with your family. You're running on stress hormones and caffeine, and you normalized it to the point where you think this is just what high performance feels like. But it's not. It's what chronic stress feels like, and it's destroying you from the inside out. Here's the solution. We use integrative techniques from Eastern contemplative practices combined with modern nervous system science. This isn't just mindfulness meditation, though that is part of it. This is a comprehensive approach to nervous system re-regulation. First, somatic awareness practices. You learn to recognize activation in your body before it controls you. You develop the ability to notice early signs like tension in your jaw, the tightness in your chest, the shallow breathing, so you can intervene before you're fully triggered. We work with the energy system, what the yogic traditions call the chakras or the energy centers. These are mystical concepts. They're maps of where we hold tension and trauma in the body. The root center relates to safety and security. The sacral center relates to creativity and sexuality. The solar plexus relates to power and self-worth. The heart center relates to connection and compassion. The throat center relates to authentic expression. The third eye to intuition and insight. And the crown center relates to consciousness itself. When these centers are blocked by unconscious patterns, chronic stress or unprocessed trauma, your entire system becomes dysregulated. Through breathwork, meditation, and awareness practices, we clear these blocks and restore the natural flow of energy through your system. We also use specific breathwork protocols for executive schedules, not 90-minute sessions that you'll never actually do. 5-minute practices that can be used between meetings. Techniques that calm your nervous system in real time so you can show up grounded instead of reactive. And we establish recovery rituals that actually work for racing minds. Most executives try meditation and give it up because their minds won't stop. That's because they're using techniques designed probably for monks, not for type A personalities running billion-dollar operations. We use methods that work with the nature of the executive mind rather than fighting against it. We create container practices, specific routines that signal to your nervous system that it's safe to relax. Your nervous system needs permission to come down from hypervigilance. These containers provide that permission through consistent practice and environmental cues. Here's the result. Within 2 or 3 sessions, clients usually report clearer thinking, better sleep, and the ability to remain calm in situations that would have previously triggered their reactivity. It isn't about managing stress. That's a losing battle. This is about fundamentally changing your relationship to stress. It's about building resilience so that challenges no longer dysregulate you. It's about accessing the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode, so your body can finally heal from years of chronic activation. When your nervous system is regulated, everything else becomes easier. Your decisions are clearer, your relationships improve, your health improves, your performance actually increases because you're operating from presence rather than panic. Part 2 is shadow work and integrating unconscious patterns. Here's where most executive coaching fails completely. They focus on conscious strategies while ignoring the unconscious patterns running the show. The problem is you have parts of yourself you've been avoiding your entire career, if not your entire life. The anger you suppress because leaders aren't supposed to be angry, the vulnerability you hide because vulnerability is weakness in this world, the shame beneath the imposter syndrome that you've never spoken aloud. These shadow aspects don't disappear when you ignore them. They leak out as self-sabotage, projection onto the team, destructive patterns that you can't seem to break despite knowing better. Carl Jung said it perfectly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Every unexamined part of yourself is controlling you from the shadows. Every emotion you've pushed down is influencing your decisions. Every wound you haven't healed is creating blind spots in your leadership. Most of your limiting beliefs were formed before the age of 7. Think about that. The beliefs that are running your multi-million-dollar decisions were created by a child who was trying to survive their family system. The perfectionism that came from a childhood where love was conditional on performance. The need to prove yourself that came from not feeling seen or valued for who you actually were. The inability to delegate because no one else can do it right. That's a control pattern born from early experiences of abandonment or betrayal. These aren't leadership principles. They're trauma responses from childhood now masquerading as personality traits. Your ego developed defense mechanisms to protect you from pain, intellectualization, rationalization, projection, denial. These defenses serve you when you were vulnerable, but now they're limiting you. They're keeping you small. They're preventing you from accessing your full potential. The solution is that we use Jungian depth psychology techniques to bring unconscious material into awareness. This is the work of making the shadow conscious. First, we identify specific childhood experiences that created your current limitations, not to blame anyone or your parents or to stay stuck in a victimhood, but to understand the origin of your patterns so that you can update them. We use the origin model assessment to map your unique psychological landscape rather than applying generic frameworks that don't account for your individual conditioning. We explore the concept of the core wound. This is the fundamental point of early childhood trauma, of early emotional trauma that shaped your personality construct and core beliefs. Neurobiologically, this trauma is encoded in your brain and your body, influencing your behavior and perception at an unconscious level. The core wound is also the contact point to your essence, your true self. Think of it like this. You built a fortress of personality around your original wound. The fortress was meant to protect you, but now it's a prison. The only way out is back through the wound itself to discover what's on the other side, your essence, your authentic nature, your true self. We work with integrating split off parts through techniques similar to internal family systems. You have parts that are angry, parts that are scared, parts that are ashamed. These parts are often at war with each other, which is why you feel internal conflict when external circumstances are fine. We help these parts communicate, understand each other, and ultimately integrate so you're operating from wholeness rather than fragmentation. We examine your ego defenses and how they're actually creating the problems you're trying to solve. Your need to control is creating the chaos you fear. Your inability to trust is creating the isolation you dread. Your perfectionism is preventing the excellence you seek. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can choose differently. We also work with releasing outdated identities that served you once but now constrain you. The identity of the struggling entrepreneur that you've held onto even though you're now successful. The identity of the underdog that keeps you in fight mode even when you've already won. The identity of the self-made person that prevents you from receiving support. And the result? Within 3 to 6 months, the patterns that have controlled you for decades begin to dissolve. Our clients report feeling like they're meeting themselves for the first time. Not the performance, not the persona, but the actual person beneath all the conditioning. The self-doubt quiets because you've addressed its source. The imposter syndrome loses its grip because you've integrated the split of parts that were carrying the shame. You stop repeating the same destructive cycles because you've made the unconscious patterns conscious. This is transformational work. It's not quick fixes or surface level tactics. It's the deep excavation of your psyche that most people avoid their entire lives. But it's also the most liberating work you'll ever do because it frees you from patterns you didn't even know were controlling you. By the way, if you're watching this and realizing that you've been dealing with some of these patterns for years, the chronic stress, the leadership isolation, the success that still feels empty, I want you to know that you don't have to figure this out alone. If you want some help implementing the deep inner work I'm covering in this video, and you're ready to actually do the transformational process, rather than just learn about it, you can click the first link in the description to schedule a consultation where we'll assess whether this work is right for you and map out what your specific path forward would look like. This isn't for everyone. It's specifically for senior executives and C-suite leaders managing meaningful revenue who are tired of surface level coaching and ready to do inner work that creates lasting transformation. Now let's continue with the framework. Part 3 is from reactive to responsive leadership. This is about transforming how you show up under pressure. The problem is when you're triggered, you react. The email that makes you boil over, the team member who pushes your buttons, the investor who questions your vision, the board member who undermines you in the meeting. In those moments, you're not leading, you're defending. You're not strategic, you're in survival mode. Your amygdala has hijacked your prefrontal cortex. You're operating from your limbic system, your emotional brain, even sometimes the reptilian brain, not from the executive functions. Reactive leadership creates chaos. It damages trust. It perpetuates the very stress you're trying to escape. Your team learns to walk on eggshells. Your relationships become transactional. Your decisions are driven by ego defense rather than a strategic vision. The problem isn't that you get triggered. Everyone gets triggered. The problem is that you don't have the capacity to sit with a trigger without immediately reacting to it. There's no space between stimulus and response. Something happens and you react automatically, unconsciously, from your conditioning rather than from your conscious choice. Here's the solution. Developing the capacity to sit with discomfort without immediately reacting to it. This is one of the most important skills you can develop as a leader. We teach you to distinguish between reacting and responding. Reacting is unconscious, defensive, automatic. It's driven by your nervous system activation and your unconscious patterns. Responding is conscious, intentional, chosen. It comes from presence rather than protection. Building the internal space between stimulus and response is the key. As Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. We cultivate this space through meditation and awareness practices. You learn to observe your triggers without being consumed by them. You develop what we call the inner observer or the witness consciousness, the part of you that can watch your reactions without identifying with them. We use emotional regulation techniques that work in real time, not theories you study, but practices you apply in the moment. Breath techniques that calm your nervous system in 30 seconds, somatic practices that discharge activation before it builds into reactivity, cognitive reframes that shift your perspective immediately. We also work on understanding your specific triggers and the stories they're connected to. When someone questions your competence, why does that trigger you? What childhood wound is being activated? When someone challenges your authority, what does that feel like? Why does that feel like a threat? What pattern is running? Once you understand the source of your triggers, they lose their power. You stop taking things personally because you realize it's not actually about you. It's about your conditioning. You stop defending because you're no longer protecting an image. You're expressing from authenticity. This combines transpersonal psychology with contemplative practices to create what I call conscious presence under fire, the ability to remain centered when everyone around you is losing their minds. And the result? You develop the ability to remain grounded when everything is falling apart. When your team is panicking, you're calm. When the market is crashing, you're clear. When crisis hits, you're the eye of the storm. Decisions become clearer because you're not making them from activation. Relationships deepen because people feel your stability and they trust it. Your team feels your presence and it transforms the entire organizational culture. You stop being controlled by your reactions. You stop creating drama from dysregulation. You start leading from presence, from consciousness, and from choice. This is authentic power. Part 4, breaking the overwork pattern and the psychology of delegation. Let's address the elephant in the room, shall we? You work too much and you know it. There's a part of you that needs to be needed, that desires identity from being indispensable, that doesn't trust others to maintain your standards, that equates your worth with productivity. This is often rooted in early experiences where your value was tied to your output, where love was conditional on achievement, where asking for help meant weakness, and where you learned that the only person you could rely on was yourself. You developed what we call the helping trap. What started as leadership has become enabling. You're not empowering your team, you're creating codependency. They wait for you to make decisions because you've trained them that you will. You're burned out. They're disempowered and the cycle perpetuates. The overwork pattern is also a form of avoidance. When you're busy all the time, you don't have to feel. You don't have to face emptiness. You don't have to acknowledge the relationships you're neglecting or the parts of yourself you're suppressing. Work becomes a socially acceptable addiction and you hide behind your importance. The solution? First, uncovering the unconscious needs being met by overwork. What are you avoiding? What are you proving? What would happen if you actually stop? We work on developing new sources of identity beyond productivity. Who are you when you're not working? Can you even answer that question? Most executives can't. Your identity has become so fused with your role that you don't know where the role ends and you begin. We establish boundaries that feel psychologically safe, not arbitrary boundaries that you'll immediately violate, but boundaries that come from understanding what you actually need to feel secure. We work on releasing the need for control that's actually fear in disguise. You don't trust your team because you don't trust life. You need to control outcomes because uncertainty feels like danger. This is nervous system dysregulation playing out as leadership style. We teach you to delegate not just tasks, but ownership and decision-making authority. Real delegation means you might not agree with every decision, and that's okay. Real delegation means you give people room to fail, to learn, to grow. Real delegation means you're building leaders, not executors. This requires you to grieve the identity of being the hero, the savior, the only one who can do it right. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not being needed. It requires you to trust, which means you have to heal the wounds that made you unable to trust in the first place. Here's the result. You create actual space in your life, not just calendar gaps, but psychological freedom. The mental bandwidth that's been consumed by low-value task returns for strategic thinking. You learn to trust your team, which means they finally get to step up. You rediscover what it feels like to have energy at the end of the day instead of collapsing in front of Netflix because you're too fried to do anything meaningful. You break the cycle of overwork and burnout. You create sustainability. You build a business that doesn't require your constant intervention to function. And most importantly, you reclaim your life. Part 5, leadership isolation and creating sanctuary. The C-suite is inherently lonely. Let's talk about why and what to do about it. The problem is there's no one you can be fully vulnerable with. Your team needs you to be strong, so you can't show doubt. Your board wants confidence, so you can't admit uncertainty. Your family doesn't understand the weight you carry, so you don't burden them. You can't show weakness to your competitors or your peers because it will be used against you. This isolation compounds stress and creates a sense of existential loneliness even when you're surrounded by people. You're performing all day long. You're wearing the mask of leadership and there's no way you can take it off. Most executives are living with armor they can't remove because there's no way safe for them to do so. You've learned that vulnerability is dangerous, that showing your true feelings will be exploited, that admitting struggle means weakness, so you carry everything alone. The stress of decisions that affect hundreds or thousands of lives the weight of responsibility for people's livelihoods, the pressure of investor expectations, the complexity of managing ego conflicts at the executive level, the ethical dilemma that have no clean answers. And you can't talk about it. You can't talk about any of it, so it just compounds inside of you. The solution. The coaching relationship becomes a sanctuary, the one place you can drop the persona and examine what's really happening. This is about creating a container of psychological safety where vulnerability is strength, not weakness, where you can process the emotional weight of leadership that has nowhere else to go, where you can examine your blind spots without judgment, where you can acknowledge doubt without it being used against you. We address the specific blind spots you can't see from inside your own experience, the ways your shadow is leaking into your leadership, the patterns you're repeating unconsciously, the defense mechanisms you're deploying without realizing it. We help you connect with your authentic self beneath the executive identity, because somewhere along the way you forgot that you're a human being, not just a human doing. You're a person with feelings, needs, vulnerabilities, not just a role with responsibilities. This isn't therapy, but it is therapeutic. It's not consulting, but it is transformational. It's a unique space that combines the best of both, the depth work of psychology with the strategic focus of executive development. And the result? You stop feeling so alone. You have a place to process the complexities of leadership without judgment or agenda. You develop the capacity to be vulnerable without it feeling like weakness. You learn that acknowledging struggle doesn't make you less capable. It makes you more human. This one shift often creates more relief than any strategy ever could, because it addresses the fundamental human need for connection and being seen. You realize that you don't have to carry everything alone. You don't have to perform all the time. You don't have to have all the answers. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to be superhuman, you become a better leader because your team can relate to you, because you stop managing from ego and start leading from authenticity, because you model the vulnerability you want to see in your culture. Part 6, aligning values, purpose, and authentic power. This is where everything comes together. The problem, you've been successful by external metrics, but you've lost touch with why any of it matters. Your values are unclear or have been compromised by pragmatism. You said you valued integrity, but you've made deals that violated it. You said you valued family, but you've missed countless dinners and events. You said you valued health, but you're running yourself into the ground. You're leading by what you think you should do rather than what you genuinely called to do. You're making decisions based on other people's expectations rather than your own truth. You're building a life that looks impressive from the outside but feels empty on the inside. This misalignment creates the emptiness even when everything looks perfect from the outside, because you can have everything and feel like you have nothing if you're not aligned with your essence. And the solution? Deep work on clarifying your core values beneath the conditioning. Not the values you think you should have, but the values that are actually true for you. Not the values you learned from your culture or from your family, but the values that emerge from your essence. We use the origin model to guide this exploration. It maps the journey from ego to essence, from personality construct to authentic self. It shows you where you're operating from false identifications and where you're connected to your truth. We work on connecting to purpose that transcends ego and legacy. Not the purpose that sounds good on your about page, but the purpose you feel in your bones, the reason you're here that goes deeper than accumulating wealth or building empires. We help you align your leadership approach with your authentic self. This means you stop trying to be the leader you think you should be and start expressing the leader you actually are. You stop copying other people's playbooks and start trusting your own intuition. You develop the courage to make decisions that honor your truth even when it's uncomfortable. This means saying no to opportunities that don't align, setting boundaries that protect your energy, choosing depth over breadth, meaning over metrics, being over doing. We explore contribution as the highest form of success. Not what you can get, but what you can give. Not how much you can accumulate, but how much you can create. Not the legacy of your achievements, but the impact of your presence. This integrates transpersonal psychology's focus on meaning with practical business application. It's not spiritual bypassing or abstract philosophy. It's about aligning your inner world with your outer world, so they're in coherence rather than in conflict. The result, within 12 or 24 months, you're leading from a completely different place, not from fear or failure or the need for validation, but from groundedness in who you actually are, not from the wounds that drive you, but from the essence that guides you. Not from the ego that needs to prove itself, but from the self that has nothing to prove. Your teams feel it. They feel the shift from performing to presence. They respond to authenticity. They trust integrity. Your decisions reflect it. They become more aligned, more clear, more courageous. You stop second-guessing yourself because you're connected to your truth. Your entire life reorganizes around this new center. Relationships improve, health improves, satisfaction increases. Not because circumstances changed, but because you changed your relationship to circumstances. You discover that authentic power doesn't come from domination. It comes from integration. It doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. It doesn't come from proving yourself. It comes from being yourself. Part 7. Crisis as catalyst for breakthrough. Let's address what brought many of you here. Crisis. The problem? Burnout, divorce, a leadership conflict that exposed your blind spots, health issues from chronic stress, a public failure that shattered your image, an existential crisis that made you question everything. These feel like failures. They feel like endings. They feel like proof that you're not as capable as you thought you were. But here's what you need to understand. These crises are not failures. They're invitations. They're your psyche's way of forcing you to look at what you've been avoiding. The solution. Reframing crisis as the doorway to transformation. Every breakdown precedes a breakthrough, if you're willing to work with it consciously. Crisis strips away pretense. It forces you to look at what wasn't working. It reveals the unsustainability of your current approach. It shows you the price you've been paying for success. We use crisis as an opportunity to examine the patterns that created it. What was your burnout trying to tell you? What was your relationship collapse revealing about your intimacy patterns? What was your health crisis showing you about how you've been treating your body? We work with letting go of identities and behaviors that no longer serve. This is a death of sorts. The death of who you thought you were. The death of how you thought life had to be. And life, like all deaths, it requires grieving. But on the other side of that grief is birth, rebirth, the birth of something more authentic, more sustainable, more aligned, the birth of the leader you're actually meant to be, rather than the leader you've been performing. We help build something more sustainable and authentic on the other side, not just returning to the status quo, but creating something fundamentally different. The result, what looked like an ending becomes a beginning. Clients often say their crisis was the best thing that ever happened to them, because it forced the transformation they needed, wouldn't have chosen. The burnout that made them reevaluate everything. The divorce that made them confront the intimacy patterns. The health scare that made them prioritize differently. Crisis has a way of clarifying what actually matters. When you're facing mortality or failure or loss, the superficial falls away. You stop caring about appearances and start caring about truth. You stop chasing validation and start seeking meaning. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold. The crack becomes part of the beauty. The breakage becomes part of the story. The vessel is more valuable after it's been broken and repaired than it was in its original perfect state. This is what we do with your crisis. We don't hide the cracks. We illuminate them with gold. We make your breakdown part of your breakthrough story. Part 8. Integration and stabilization. Transformation isn't an event, it's a process that requires ongoing integration. The solution is building sustainability through daily practices that maintain the shifts you've made. These aren't complicated or time-consuming. They're simple practices that keep you connected to your center. Morning meditation to start your day from presence rather than reactivity. 5 to 15 minutes of sitting in silence, connecting with your breath, accessing witness consciousness before you dive into the demands of the day. Somatic check-ins throughout the day to notice where you're becoming activated and to discharge the stress before it accumulates. This might be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths before each meeting, or doing a body scan during your commute. Energy center awareness practices that keep your system clear and flowing. Working with your energy centers or chakras through visualization, breathwork, or movement to release blockages before they become problems. Evening reflection to process the day and release what you're carrying. Journaling, meditation, or simply sitting in silence to metabolize your experiences rather than suppressing them. We establish integration techniques that prevent backsliding into old patterns. Because change is easy, sustaining change is hard. Your nervous system will try to pull you back to familiar patterns, even when they're painful, because familiar equals safe to your survival brain. We set up regular check-ins to address new layers as they emerge, because this work is iterative. You clear one layer and discover another underneath. You integrate one pattern and you notice a deeper one operating. This isn't the problem, it's the process. We build support structures that make transformation a way of being, not a temporary state. Community, accountability, ongoing coaching, whatever structures you need to maintain the shifts rather than reverting to autopilot. The result? The changes stick. This isn't another self-help phase that fades after 3 months. This isn't a temporary high that wears off when you return to your regular environment. You've fundamentally reorganized your inner world, and that changes everything because external circumstances will always fluctuate. Markets will crash, competitors will emerge, crisis will happen. But when your inner world is ordered, when you're connected to your essence, when you've done the integration work, those external circumstances don't destabilize you the way they used to. You're operating from a different foundation, not from ego and fear, but from essence and trust. Not from reaction and defense, but from response and creation. Not from performance and proving, but from presence and being. This is what we mean by self-mastery. Not mastery over external circumstances, which is impossible and exhausting, but mastery of your internal experience, which is both possible and liberating. So look, the information in this free course genuinely has the power to completely transform your experience of leadership and life. So I hope you went through all of this, got to the end with a bunch of notes, and got some value from it. At this point, you have two options. Option one, try and implement all this by yourself, spending the time, energy, and emotional labor of navigating your unconscious patterns and psychological blind spots alone, dealing with all of the resistance, self-deception, and backsliding you will 100% face if you're doing this for the first time without guidance. Option two, get help from someone who has guided countless senior executives through this exact transformation, has solved all the problems you'll inevitably face, and create the safe container you need to actually do this work so you can get this right the first time instead of spending years spinning your wheels. And if we're being honest, if you still experience the success-emptiness disconnect, chronic stress, or leadership isolation, then you 100% need support. That's why I want you to click the first link in the description to schedule a consultation call where we'll assess whether this work is right for you. This is for you if you're a senior executive or C-suite leader managing meaningful revenue, tired of surface level coaching, and ready to do the inner work that creates lasting transformation. So if that's you, click the link, book your consultation, and I'll speak to you soon. Make sure to like this video so you can easily find it again. Subscribe to the channel for more videos on executive transformation, self-mastery, and the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and leadership. And I'll see you again soon.